Hello, Year 8. This is the space topic, Lesson 6, and I am Mr. Radmull, and I trust you are all safe and well. So, today's lesson is about magnetism, because next lesson I want to talk to you about Earth's magnetic field. So, your driving question is, what's the difference between a permanent magnet and an induced magnet? And the starter question is, what can be picked up by a magnet? Is it a plastic cup, or is it B, a steel paper clip? So pause the video, get the driving question down, please. Okay, so yes, of course, it is a steel paper clip because plastic is a non-metal and is not a magnetic metal. So let's get going. So the use of magnets is actually much more prevalent than you might think. I mean, obviously, you've probably got some fridge magnets stuck to your fridge, but also magnetism is very important in terms of computing. It's very important in terms of the electric motor, and it's very important in all kinds of areas of science and engineering, in fact. So let's get started in trying to understand this idea of magnetism. So it is not every metal that is magnetic. In actual fact, in terms of elements, remember an element is something only made of one type of atom. The only elements that are magnetic are iron, nickel, and cobalt. So in terms of pure metal elements, iron, cobalt, and nickel. And iron, of course, being the most abundant metal that you probably come across, things made of iron. Okay, there they are there, look, iron, cobalt, nickel, the three magnetic metals on the periodic table. Now, you will also come across a metal called steel, which is magnetic. Lots of things are made of steel, and steel is an alloy. And the reason why steel is magnetic is because it's made of iron and carbon, but the magnetic bit of steel is the iron bit. Okay, so steel is another common metal that's magnetic, and it's magnetic because it's a mixture, an alloy of iron and carbon. But the iron bit is what makes it magnetic. Okay, so let's quickly summarize where we are so far. Which metals are magnetic? Pause the video, see if you can spot the correct answer. Okay, yes, it is iron, cobalt, steel, and nickel. So here is what we call a traditional bar magnet. So a bar magnet is normally, not always, but normally a long piece of metal with a north pole and a south pole. So the two different ends of the bar magnets are different, and we'll talk about why that is now. Okay, so each end of a magnet is called a pole. There is a north pole and a south pole. Now, both poles will attract, there'll be a force of attraction between the poles and any magnetic metal that we've just talked about. So, for example, these drawing pins, which are made of steel, attracted to the magnet. There's a force of attraction. Okay. Now, in terms of the differences between the poles, that comes when you actually try and put two poles together. Now, if you put two magnetic poles together and they are opposite poles, so a north pole and a south pole, there is a force of attraction. Okay, so they attract each other, an attractive force. However, if you put the same poles together, so a south and a south pole, a north and a north pole, there is what's called a force of repulsion. So if the poles are the same, they push each other away. There's a force of repulsion. They repel each other. So this is the difference between the two poles and how you can also identify these magnetic poles. So again, let's sum up then, please. Which of these is the porky pie, which is East London's slang for lie? Pause the video and see if you can spot it. Okay, did you spot it? It was in actual fact B. It's a north and north pole which will experience a force of repulsion, not a south and a north pole. A north and a north pole, or a south and a south pole. So a bar magnet has a north and a south pole at either end. That's right. A north pole and south pole will experience a force of attraction. That's right. A magnet will attract other objects of certain metals: cobalt, nickel, iron, and steel. So a permanent magnet, what do we mean by what's a permanent magnet? Okay, so if you've got a permanent magnet, what does that mean about the object that you are holding? Have a read through these descriptions. Which one is correctly describing what you think a permanent magnet is and what it does? Okay, so the answer is C. So a permanent magnet is a metal object made of iron, nickel, or cobalt, or steel, and that object will attract other magnetic metals and also attract or repel other permanent magnets because it will have a north and a south pole. Okay, so let's talk about what happens when we attach metal objects to a permanent magnet. For example, steel paper clips. Now, if you put steel paper clips on the end of a magnet, but then attach other paper clips to those paper clips and create like a chain, they all stick together. And that's because these paper clips have become what are called induced magnets. You could do this with steel paper clips or iron nails. And what happens is that these objects, the nails or the paper clips, become temporary magnets, induced magnets. They have an induced magnetic field on them. More about magnetic fields next lesson. So as you can see, if you've got the steel paper clips, here look, this paper clip here becomes an induced magnet with the south pole here, which is attracted to the north pole. North pole here attracted to the south pole of the next paper clip, which has a north pole here. So the paper clips and the iron nails get their own south pole and north pole, and they line up north to south, south to north as they attract each other. Okay, and this is called induced magnetism. Now, induced magnetism doesn't last very long. So if you take the permanent magnet away, the induced magnets lose their magnetism very quickly. They might stay magnetized for a very short amount of time, but not for very long once the magnet has been taken away. Okay, so induced magnets and permanent magnets. Have a read through which is the porky pie. Okay, so yep, it's A. Paper clips attracted to a permanent magnet, the paper clips become what are called induced magnets. So when a paper clip is separated from a permanent magnet, it no longer is an induced magnet. So that's true. An induced magnet has a north pole and a south pole. It does. An induced magnet can lose its magnetism very easily. That also is correct. So finally, let's talk about how you can actually find out if something's a magnet or not, and also which pole is which, because they don't come in colors. So in terms of figuring out if something is a magnet or not and which pole is which, you need to suspend a magnet by a piece of string, so it is able to move freely. And then you need to bring another permanent magnet close to one of the poles. And if you've got a north pole repelling another pole, that pole must be another north pole. If you've got a south pole repelling one of the poles, it must be a south pole. So this way you can discover which pole is which, if it's a magnet or not, and which pole is which by suspending the magnet by a thread so it's able to move freely. So there it is there, look, suspend the magnet, and of course bring the pole, a known pole of a permanent magnet close to each side to discover which pole is which. Okay, so let's bring these ideas together, please. For describe, can you tell me which metals are magnetic? Then for explain, can you explain what an object is, a magnet is? Can you explain how two magnets repel? Can you explain how two magnets attract? There are sentence starters in red to get you going with that. Then can you talk about, for use, can you talk about induced magnetism? Okay, can you explain what an induced magnet is? And can you draw a diagram of 3 paper clips in a row attached to a magnet and mark out their north and south poles? And then for combine, can you describe an experiment to determine whether an object is a magnet or not a magnet? So pause the video and have a go at these questions, please. Okay, so let's go through the answers. So for describe, metals that are magnetic are nickel, cobalt, iron. They're the elements. And steel, that's the mixture of iron and carbon. Okay, those 4 metals, most common metals you come across, which are magnetic. What is a magnet? Well, it's, an object is a magnet if it attracts another magnetic metal and if it attracts or repels another magnet. 2 magnets will repel each other if 2 of the same poles, like north and north or south, come together. How 2 magnets attract each other? Well, it's going to be if it's a north and a south pole coming together. There'll be a force of attraction. Okay, next up, explain the difference between a permanent magnet and an induced magnet. So when a paperclip attracts to a permanent magnet, it becomes an induced magnet. The north pole of the paperclip attracts to the south pole. The difference between an induced magnet and a permanent magnet is an induced magnet will lose its magnetism very quickly once it's separated from the permanent magnet. There is an example of this. Look, you've got the paperclips all in a row, and remember the poles of the induced magnets, that's got to be a south pole because it's attracted to the north pole. That's got to be a north pole because it's attracted to the south pole. And describe an experiment to determine whether an object is a magnet or not. You need to hang the object by a thread so it can move about freely. You need to hold the north pole of a permanent magnet near one of the ends. If it attracts, it's a south pole. If it repels, it's the north pole. And then repeat with the other end of the object. So, bringing this together. For describe, can you state metals that are magnetic? For explain, can you explain what a magnet is? For use, can you explain the difference between a permanent and induced magnet? And for combine, can you describe an experiment to determine whether an object is a magnet or not? Okay, and remember year 8, there is now a 10-question quiz on Show My Homework for you to complete. We will record the results and we are looking to email the results to your parents and guardians. Thank you very much, year 8. Stay safe.